Is it possible that you're wasting marketing dollars by only doing user acquisition where you've always done it in the past? Or maybe limiting your growth? Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds, the podcast for growth marketers. My name is John Koetsier. Look, we all know that UA pros need to hit the big markets, right? That's where the people are. That's where the money is in a lot of cases. But is it possible that you're missing some big pockets of opportunity if you only spend in the US or only in Western Europe or only in the big Asian countries? Moloco just completed a major report on global growth, and they think there's some missed opportunities here. To chat, we have Tom Shadbolt, Moloco's Senior Marketing Insights Manager. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you so much, John. Really excited to talk through these latest insights and really about global expansion as a topic overall.
Awesome. Looking forward to it as well. You know, you analyzed a lot, right? You analyzed 4,000 apps, $3 billion in in-app purchase revenue across 195 countries. Big picture, what did you learn?
Yeah, well, I think we confirmed a lot of things that I think are apparent to us and our leading advertisers. But I think also we were able to get some really great insights into those areas of opportunities, as we said. So in terms of the top line, as you intro, 60% of gaming UA spend is focused in 5 markets. Again, that's not a surprise, but I think what is interesting is the changing trends there, right? And the consolidation that's happening over time. And really the implications that has for finding future growth. And so, as performance marketers, we are very much focused on that short term. But we also need to marry that with longer term opportunity. And I think there's some interesting trends in the gaming industry overall, which are leading us more to the short term, which I think you've discussed on this show over a number of episodes. But I think we can sort of shed some light there in terms of where that's going. And I think finally, as you say, we looked at, a lot of revenue. We were able to see some pockets of opportunity in markets that, some advertisers are exploiting already and in Europe and in Asia. But we're also able to see, in markets like Brazil and India and South Africa, where viability of UA is, increasing over time. And that's a sort of evergreen question, is that when are these markets, going to be viable from a value versus cost perspective? Well, we're seeing advertisers succeed in a number of those markets already. And I think that trend is going to increase over time. So yeah, looking forward to going a little bit deeper on these things.
Awesome. Cool. So we'll get into a lot of different stuff. We'll talk about the 5 countries that account for 60%, including one country that's 40% of gaming UA spend. We'll talk about why that's so concentrated, any risks to that. And we'll talk about finding the right markets for different genres, because it does differ, and a bunch of other stuff, including how to unlock growth elsewhere and some of the potential rewards for that. Let me start here. Your report says 5 countries account for 60% of gaming UA spend. And I did read it, but I'm going to try and do it off the top of my head right here. So obviously the United States has got to be one of those, right? And I'm guessing South Korea is another one. And I'm guessing Japan is another one. I'm guessing China is another one. I'm not sure which one is the 5th. What's the 5th country? And did I make any mistakes?
No, you didn't make any mistakes. US, by far the largest country, 40% of overall UA spend. That marries very closely with where revenue is coming from. You're also right in terms of South Korea and Japan, Germany and France making up those other markets.
Okay.
Overall, about 50% of spend is going to those English language markets, which, when you're thinking about segmenting markets, generally that's a helpful way of framing it. But yes, it's hyper concentrated, and that's for a number of, good reasons. And as I sort of introed at the start, performance marketers know what they're doing. They know their customers. They know how to drive revenue. There are a number of trends sort of happening in the industry where high value payers are becoming more and more important. They are driving more and more of total revenue. And that leads you to sort of focusing on where you can maximize that. Where is the scale? Yeah. And that's why the US is becoming, increasingly important. It's not just that it's making up 40%. Actually, that trend is probably moving upwards, which is one of the more surprising things. Like, we're here sitting talking about finding global opportunities, and then we're saying actually the US is still by far the most important market. but that's the reality of these conversations. It's never quite
That is true.
as you would want. Um,
That is true.
but I think there are a number of, longer term considerations that advertisers need to take into account when there is so much increased competition. So that when everyone is facing
Mhm.
this very small pool of users who are, increasingly becoming important, the cost price and importance of, and your acquisition is one of those things. It's a market like anything else, and as soon as you increase that demand, costs go up accordingly.
Right.
And I think that's why we want to talk about this. At the moment, is that the 2 to 3 year plans are things that advertisers need to be wary of. Diversifying those media budgets is incredibly important, and we see uh, advertisers take advantage of this already. So when you look at the Chinese mobile app gaming advertisers, they have much more diversified spend, and they are sort of focusing opportunities across EMEA, across APAC, across the US, and they're seeing great success. And when you compare that to US based advertisers who are actually spending up to 60% of their budgets in North America, the question becomes are we over concentrating, and is there opportunities to take more of a global mindset?
That is a great insight and a great question. Now, was I wrong on China, or is that just a different bucket? Is that just something that you need to analyze separately?
China is very likely the second largest gaming market globally. It's something that we haven't focused on in this report, as there are a lot of challenges with targeting within China
Yes.
itself.
Yeah, there's
Um,
a lot of different
so
challenges there, right? Many different app stores, lots of data challenges. You kind of need boots on the ground and different apps and which apps can be published and which apps can't be. So yeah, a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, so we've sort of put that to one side for the purpose of the report. Although we are looking at the sort of export market from China, and that's really where that sort of
Which is
insight comes
huge,
from.
and
It's
you
like,
just mentioned. Exactly.
and then they are primarily export driven, so they are a great sort of great test case to look at. Sort of if you are thinking truly with an export first mindset, how are they behaving, and what can we learn from that?
This is a total sidebar to where we're going, but it is super interesting to consider where that's gonna go because the China-based app publishers, game publishers have been incredibly successful. And they have exploited a lot of different niches in a lot of different foreign to them markets. On the other hand, foreign publishers, not in China, have challenges getting into China. There's lots of regulations, boots on the ground. Will your app be released, not be released? It'll be interesting to see in this polarizing global ecosystem that we're in if things will change how this is developing. India, for instance, has said no to a bunch. I think it's about 200 Chinese apps, and we'll see if the state starts doing some of the stuff. TikTok has always been an issue, ByteDance and stuff like that. Anyways, not going there right now, but that'll be an interesting reality to view and observe over the next few years. Okay, so we talked about concentration, and you talked about some of the value of not concentrating. Some of those Chinese app publishers who are spending in multiple markets. Talk about the risks to concentration if you're a US based or maybe a Western Europe based game publisher, maybe an Indian publisher, who knows, right? If you're just focusing on one place.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at those those macro trends in the industry to really sort of see that importance. And one thing is that we know installs overall are declining within gaming. But we also know that advertisers are increasing user value over time, and there's a number of different things that are enabling that. Um, Machine learning based UA, which is increasing its effectiveness over time, but that's also married with those increasing costs, right? So you become more effective at finding those high value payers. You're spending more to acquire them, and that is something which sort of compounds over time the effect of that. And
Hmm.
that means you really need to think outside of what is your backup plan there as costs increase, as competition increase, and can you look towards other markets? So it's not necessarily risk. It's more about thinking about opportunity and thinking about the long
Hmm.
term. And in the short term,
Hmm.
this seems to be working. Like advertisers are increasing revenue. They are able to extract more value from users in these large markets. The risk is really if that is sustainable? Is the status
Yeah.
quo something that will continue?
Do you need a different strategy for UA for iOS versus Android? I mean, on the face of it, you do. The privacy scenario is different. The device identifier scenario is different, right? On the other hand, a lot of targeting for some of these high value players is pretty broad. Anyways, you're looking at what games are compatible with what other games. You know, where do players come from, and they like this game, that sort of thing, right? So, do you see a diverging strategy there?
I wouldn't necessarily say a diverging strategy. I mean, you can't be platform agnostic, but at Moloco, we are very sort of, results and performance driven. And yes, there are a lot of different factors that influence platform globally and across different markets. Um, the US, for example, is heavily iOS based, and again, that's where we're seeing a lot of growth in those high value payers. Um, so yes, it's a consideration that needs to be made, especially when sort of approaching emerging markets as well, which are often more Android focused. But
Right.
ultimately, you want to focus on those opportunities to use data driven machine learning approaches, targeting strategies to really inform where those marketing dollars are best spent.
And it's not just about overall big pictures, right? It's very different by vertical, and your report talks about that quite a bit. Talk about that. Talk about finding the right market for each specific game, different genre that you might be in.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a trap to think about gaming as as
One
it's
big thing.
one big and it's very true that when you're looking at when you're looking at RPG, for example, as a genre, and you're sort of comparing that against social casino, and when you're sort of comparing that against more casual games, that there's a huge amount of difference. Uh, Largely, the game, overall, like from our perspective, from a growth perspective, remains consistent, and it's about understanding and sort of tailoring and localizing your sort of app experience accordingly. Um, Through the report, we highlight East Asia as as being a market of huge potential, high user value in some of these genres, but also the hardest markets to be able to crack
Hmm.
in terms of localizing apps and sort of meeting local expectations. So it's not as simple as looking at this report and sort of seeing that Japan or South Korea are markets with lower acquisition costs and higher value. Obviously, you need to marry that against uh, your genre and
Hmm.
sort of your knowledge of your own consumers.
And also your ability to localize the game, because there are some games that might be easy. There are some games that might be super hard. There are some games that are just, it's not going to work. It's never going to work. It's just not going to fit in that culture. Correct.
Yes, and that's exactly it. And it's being realistic about globally segmenting markets of
Mhm.
opportunity. And through the report, we sort of introduce some ways of sort of framing and grouping markets by sort of cultural tendencies or by language. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think, historically, really the way global opportunity is being segmented is that you have your tier one, which essentially is the US alone. You have your tier two, which is, generally European markets, Germany, France, UK. And then you have everything else bucketed together. And really everything is about sort of segmenting in that manner. I think things are changing, and I think there is a need to think more strategically about how to group markets and sort of how to maximize opportunity and sort of localization resources. And
Mhm.
we talk about that in the report. But I think understanding these markets is incredibly important. And it's not just about user value; it's about culture. It's about language. It's about many other factors.
Yeah, yeah. It's also interesting. I mean, one of the things you talk about is ARPU, right? Average revenue per paying user. And kind of generally you think, okay, the US is the tier one market, 40% of the spend is there, most of the value is there, ARPU is going to be higher there. Not true. not necessarily true. And you list a bunch of different countries that were significantly variant on that. Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is the market size effect. There is that the US is such a large market that when you're looking at averages, that's going to bring it down a little bit. But when you look
Hmm.
at the total revenue contribution of that market, you can clearly see, why the US is number one. But you're right in sort of highlighting that in markets like Qatar, Israel, Norway, Singapore, Taiwan, UAE, South Korea, Japan, Austria, Switzerland, a real breadth of markets there, all, many different sizes, many different sort of total revenue opportunity. But I think ultimately beyond that average user value, really what you need to think about is can you access these markets and can you
Hmm.
find these players in these markets? And that's
Hmm.
where our sort of outcome data really comes in. So, part of it is the user value trends and the fact that that's changing. Um, but I think what we're seeing through our outcome data is that advertisers are, able to find cheaper acquisition in Europe specifically. So Germany, France, Netherlands, cheap acquisition versus relatively high value. And I think that's sort of when I look at this report, that's where I get most excited because that suggests that advertisers can sort of fish outside of their sort of current ponds and sort of find some great opportunity in markets they might not be focused on. So yeah, as I say, Germany, France, Netherlands, Poland, Czech Republic, Greece as a market, which you wouldn't come to mind, but we
No.
are seeing our advertisers seeing significant success there.
So talk to the app or game publisher who's like intrigued by this, but their app is only in English, or only in one other, their native language, wherever they might be. Maybe they're an Indian developer or something like that. Is some of this growth accessible to them, even though they're not in a native language of those smaller countries? Like if you go to Norway, I'd assume that, from my experience with the Nordics, probably 70% of the people that are professionals and educated speak English. And that's probably almost 70% of everybody there, right? And same thing with Netherlands. I've almost never met a Dutch person that didn't speak English and other things like that. But is that a valid assumption that it can work without actually localizing to a native language in the smaller countries that are still high value?
It can work. There isn't really a satisfying yes or no answer to that, and it really depends on the category that you're in.
Hmm.
But the, I think if you were only in English, I think there's a huge amount of potential opportunity that's being missed. And as I say, I think thinking sort of holistically about that sort of global segmentation is really important. Do you want to sort of focus on Spanish language, for example, and be able to access South America, for
Hmm.
example? As you say, in some European markets, you can get away with English language only, but in others you can't. So really it's about testing and learning, right? And this is sort of where measurement sort of comes in and, leading gaming advertisers are constantly sort of testing. They are soft launching in
Hmm.
markets. They are learning, but this, I think, needs to become the new normal, especially as we are seeing this greater consolidation trend in the US and more established markets. Um, so, understanding where, you know, how global expansion launches compare versus business as usual, spend consolidation tests. There's a lot of ways that these advertisers can trial first
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
obviously change practice over the longer term. I think it's
Hmm.
also important to say we're not saying to reallocate all your media but to Greece
No more
or Qatar
America.
or Iceland. Really, it's about experimentation and learning what works.
Yeah. So it'd be a mistake to take, oh, Iceland has very high value users. All our marketing spend's going there. It's like 400,000 people. We're going to kill it. It's not going to work.
Yeah, that would very quickly change. That would very quickly. Um, but it's more a mentality shift, and I think that's really what's important. And I think that an element of patience is important when thinking about global
Hmm.
expansion and thinking about that long term and having those real conversations with CMOs who might need to be sort of ready to think about sort of sacrificing short term gain for sort of longer term advantage. And I think sort of preparing for this sort of current trend of consolidation to perhaps not be everlasting, and the fact that there is a lot of market changes, which might mean that opportunity is growing elsewhere.
I think that's a very hard ask, isn't it? You're talking to performance marketers who live or die by immediate performance. You're asking them to think a little longer term, and that's really, really challenging. That's a mind shift, and it probably doesn't happen naturally until you start hitting some natural barriers to your growth. You've
Yep.
filled your niche, right? And you're looking at what am I going to do, and maybe this is an answer there.
I think there is definitely going to be a first mover advantage for those who can sort of think outside that box. And I think, it's balancing that opportunity, and obviously it's taking a measured approach.
Hmm.
It's starting small, it's scaling, it's testing hypothesis, all those things that performance marketers are very used to doing. Um, but I think not necessarily the alarm bell that's going off at the moment, but there's definitely, a call or an impetus to start thinking beyond those established markets, especially as
Hmm.
competition just, continually increases.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, so look around, see what else is there. Look at your other opportunities. If you're only in English and only promoting in the U.S., that's really challenging, obviously. So you start doing that. You start looking around. You've talked about you finding those great users. Can you go into more detail about how you find them? Obviously, you're talking about testing. You're trying some campaigns. What's your secret sauce? How are you finding the highest value users?
And a lot of that comes down to sort of, partnerships for a lot of gaming advertisers. That is about using machine learning approaches. It's about sort of uh, widening that pool as much as possible,
Mhm,
and sort of
mhm.
running those experiments and understanding what is working and moving from there. So there isn't necessarily, a secret sauce. It's about
I
that
always
sort of
want a secret sauce. I want a magic bullet. I want I want the phrase, the one thing that unlocks everything. Of course, in life, we don't often get that, do we?
No, it's not as straightforward as that. But as I say, I think taking that longer term approach, working, on improving your sort of data driven targeting, um, are investments that will pay dividends over the longer term. And as we are seeing that sort of consolidation in the US, and advertisers become more effective at identifying high value players in the US, those same strategies and techniques will be valid in other markets. And those other markets are changing quickly. We
Mhm,
briefly
mhm,
spoke about Brazil and India, other markets which have very low cost of acquisition at the moment. And that equation for where user value, that is changing. And again,
mhm.
it's not easy to say exactly when those markets will become fully viable and when they will start becoming 5%, 6%, 7% of UA spend, but the balance will shift. And those advertisers who can take advantage of that, will be putting them in front of the competition.
Excellent, Tom. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this and the insights. Where can people find the report?
Moloco.com.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, John.